The antagonism between Qatar and a group of countries led by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt continues to roll on. There's been little in recent days to suggest that the standoff is soon going to resolve itself. Just in the last week, as you may have seen, the text of past agreements specifying a kind of geopolitical code of conduct among the Gulf heads of state, which Qatar is charged with breaching, appeared in the press. For its part, Qatar has refused, despite the imposition of a political and economic boycott, or as it would say, a blockade, to comply with a list of demands, initially 13, now 6, made of it. And it's characterized these demands as an attack on its sovereignty. And as both sides have dug in, there's been speculation in the media and elsewhere about a prospective tightening of these boycott measures. The United States, in the shape of Rex Tillerson, has attempted some mediation. He succeeded in agreeing a bilateral US-Qatari counterterrorism accord that approaches some of the issues at the core of the dispute, but his diplomacy has so far at least failed to change the essential dynamic. And locating the true center of gravity of US policy towards the crisis has not been easy amid signs of disagreements inside the Trump administration, not least between the president and his secretaries of state and defense. As diplomatic initiatives and deadlines for action have come and gone, the standoff seems at risk of becoming an extended confrontation, and the Gulf Cooperation Council is facing arguably its greatest internal crisis to date. Swept up into the dispute are the geopolitical pressures of a conflict-strewn regional order that is in flux and which many actors are trying to shape, and competing visions of the kind of political and sectarian interests that should express and define that order's future. Chatham House is one arena in which that debate is being conducted on the record by the governments of the region and the parties to the dispute. On the 5th of July, we welcomed Qatari Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Jassim Al Thani to address the case made against his country. Today, we welcome His Excellency Dr. Anwar bin Mohammed Gargash, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates, to provide his analysis of the origins of the crisis and his forecast for what happens next. Minister Gargash has been a prominent and respected figure in regional diplomacy for more than a decade. We look forward to him setting the issues in the wider context of the EU's regional objectives too. So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Gargash to Chatham House. Minister, the lectern is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Good to be here at Chatham House. I think, first of all, I have to say that I regret that there's still a lot of interest in this issue. I was heckled by 3 demonstrators with their mobile phones, but I'm sure I'll see the tape tonight on social media. I think I'm very happy to just first of all, start with my prepared comments, and then we'll move into a question and answer. And I hope that this is going to be quite constructive and illuminating to everybody. I think the crisis between the 4 states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, and Bahrain with Qatar, is a serious one. It's not just a local feud involving Gulf monarchies and Egypt. The dangers posed by a very wealthy state with $300 billion in reserves, which is wedded to extremist jihadism and terrorism, go far wider than that. Let me say what else it's not first. It's not about Qatar becoming a vassal state. Why should we in the UAE or Bahrain want that when we are ourselves small states? Other GCC countries, such as Kuwait and Oman, have chosen very independent paths in foreign policy without sparking a crisis. It's not about free speech, which does not exist in Qatar in the first place. The freedom that Qatar claims to provide is strictly for export only. How can we champion freedom if you do not practice it? It's not a product of new leadership in Saudi Arabia or the United States. In the early 1990s, the UAE's then ruler, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, was already concerned at the possible direction that the then Qatari Crown Prince, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa, might take, and urged him to work within the collective spirit of the GCC. In 2013, after a similar but milder crisis, the then Saudi King Abdullah obtained Qatar's agreement to mend its ways, the Riyadh Agreement, which Qatar later broke. Nor is this principally about Iran, though Iran will try to benefit from Qatar's behavior. This is instead, first and foremost, about the support offered over the past 20 years by one of the world's wealthiest countries to the cause of jihadism across the Middle East, and for specific individuals and organizations, including some linked to Al-Qaeda. It is a crisis that is exasperated by our loss of trust in Qatar. After it repeatedly broke its word to us, it has spent effort and money trying not to help us as allies should, but to undermine us and to destabilize various countries, including the largest Arab state, Egypt. This effort is reckless and will bring no benefit to Qatar. We want it to end. The UAE identified the threat of Islamist and jihadist extremism early on, in the early 1980s, when we took steps to curb Islamist influence in our education system. Some observers thought we were being alarmist, but later tragic developments proved our concerns to be valid. 2 Emiratis were among the 9/11 hijackers. It was a lesson which we took seriously. We examined and overhauled our policy towards mosques, schools, and charities. We passed comprehensive legislation to tackle terrorist finance, which we have regularly updated. And we started a long and sometimes very lonely battle against the ideology of grievance and jihad, which distorts our great religion and fuels terrorism. This is a process that began many years before the beginning of the Arab Spring. It was not always easy, but it was right. With this background, I hope you understand why we regard it as necessary and urgent to shut down state support for extremism, jihadism, and terrorism across the Arab world. And most of all, among the Arab world's wealthiest countries, the Arab Gulf. This current crisis with Qatar is at the heart of this effort. Understandably, many of our friends in Europe and beyond are concerned about this crisis. They see the Arab Gulf as a haven of stability in an unstable Middle East and as an important and functioning common market. Many would argue that it is one of the few Arab bulwarks against further Iranian expansion. We understand and respect those concerns. But as we know from meetings with American and European officials, they are also aware of Qatar's duplicity. During the Iraq War, many American officials and commanders spoke openly about the contradictions of having American planes and military moving from Al Udeid base in Qatar, while at the same time, their greatest enemy within Iraq, Al-Qaeda leader Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, was being promoted by Qatar's Al Jazeera television station. Western governments also know about Qatar's destructive role in Syria and Libya. The US State Department said openly in its 2015 country terrorism report that entities and individuals within Qatar had financed al-Nusra, which is a regional affiliate of Al-Qaeda. US Treasury Undersecretary David Cohen said in 2014 that Qatar's funding of Syrian extremists threatens to aggravate an already volatile situation in a particularly dangerous and unwelcome manner. Qatar's sponsorship of jihadist groups in Syria ultimately sabotaged wider efforts to assist the moderate, non-jihadi opposition to the Syrian regime. As a result, Syrians today find themselves between the devil and the deep blue sea, forced to choose between Assad's brutality and the cruelty of Daesh and Al-Qaeda. In Libya, Qatar has supported the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Ansar al-Sharia. In fact, Qatar's go-between with the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group is now head of the Qatari Special Forces. Yet this group is believed by the Spanish authorities to have been involved in the Madrid trade bombing of 2004, in which nearly 200 people died. According to the British press, a son of one of its members carried out the attack in the Manchester Arena in May, in which 23 adults and children died. Again, Qatar's actions have sabotaged Gulf diplomacy and funded terrorism. The Qatari behavior is known by Western governments to be destructive, and they want it to stop. This is not really about how certain groups should be classified and whether they are terrorists or not. Yes, we disagree with Qatar about the Muslim Brotherhood, which we regard as the gateway drug to jihadism. But in our list of 59 individuals and 12 organizations with links to Qatar and terrorism, the majority have proven connections with Al-Qaeda and similar organizations. And nobody denies that Al-Qaeda practices terrorism. Take, for example, Abdurrahman Naimi, who continues his activity with impunity from Qatar, despite having, as the US Treasury has said, given millions of dollars to Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. When it comes to financing of terror groups, none of us are perfect. The UAE has done much to stop individuals from donating to charities with covert links to terrorism. Our aim is to stop private financial support for terrorism from anywhere in the Gulf. That effort must continue and must be stepped up. But in Qatar, it is all too often the state that is directly supporting terrorist groups. Helping Nusra in Syria and the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group was state policy. The United States has 5 times indicted as terrorists Qatari government officials, including ones who worked at the Qatari Central Bank, the Qatar Football Association, and the Ministry of Interior. As President Trump himself has said, Qatar has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level. Just this year, the state of Qatar paid a ransom of approximately $1 billion to free a group of Qatari falconeers in southern Iraq. Multiple sources confirmed to the Financial Times that $700 million was paid to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and to the Shia militias, which they control. Between $200 and $300 million went to Al-Qaeda-related groups in Syria. In what may have been an additional payment, when Iraqi authorities searched the plane which the Qataris had sent to collect the hostages, they discovered $500 million on board hidden in sacks. As Iraqi Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi declared, hundreds of millions for armed groups. Is this acceptable? It is not. Before I turn to how I see political developments and how this current crisis will play out, a word about Qatar's destabilization of the 4 states. Qatar has spent billions of dollars to undermine what was already a very fragile Egyptian situation. This is totally unacceptable. Qatar is conspiring against Saudi Arabia, again in association with jihadists, is well documented and proven. In Bahrain, a dynastic feud has been fueled by Qatari money in attempts to undermine its neighbor. This behavior does nothing to advance Qatar's national interest. So why is it happening? As it seems to us, Qatar, since 1995, has been a rebel looking for a cause. It found that cause in jihadism, not because the architects of this policy are actually jihadists themselves, but because they believed that extremist Islamist movements were going to dominate the Middle East and wanted opportunistically to harness them as allies. As the Financial Times reported in May 2013, they are simply not choosy about the beliefs held by useful friends. This is definitely not a people's project or even an elite project. It has harmed Qatar's relations in the region. It has harmed its global reputation. It's a policy that has gone wrong, fueled by money and wayward ambition. Qatar foolishly tried to ride the tiger of jihadism. We want a permanent solution, not a prolonging of the crisis. But we do have an issue of trust. Over the last 2 decades, bilateral pressure on Qatar has not yielded results. In 2013 and 2014, after a similar, but as I mentioned, milder crisis, the Emir of Qatar, Emir Tamim, signed the Riyadh Agreement. He promised to turn the page. He pledged to stop his support for extremism and jihadism and end interference in his neighbors' affairs. None of these promises were kept. Indeed, we now ask Qatar to agree to these very same demands that it accepted in 2013. The Qatari foreign minister announced that those demands are unacceptable. Hence our harsh measures, intended mainly as a wake-up call. So where do we go from here? First, diplomacy remains our only path. We said early on that we would not escalate beyond what we consider sovereign measures granted to us by international law. That remains our position. Second, we need a regional solution and we need international monitoring. We need to be certain that Qatar, a state with $300 billion in reserve, is no longer an official or unofficial sponsor of jihadist and terrorist causes. Without that change of behavior, it is in our interest to continue to seek a separate path from that of Qatar. This is our message. You cannot be part of a regional organization dedicated to strengthening mutual security and furthering a mutual interest, and at the same time undermine that security and harm those interests. You cannot be both our friend and the friend of Al-Qaeda. Qatar talks about the necessity of dialogue, but it first leaked the 13 demands made by the 4 states, undermining the whole mediation process. If the Qataris wanted dialogue, why did they not try first to work through the mediator with a counter-proposal in a mature fashion? Why didn't they say that certain items were accepted and others were not? Instead, they said, we reject all your demands, but let's talk. But what is there to talk about then? We do see signs now, however, that our pressure is working. Qatar signing an MOU with the USA on terror financing is a positive development. Furthermore, the Qataris promised the Americans to re-examine the list of 59 individuals and 12 organizations published by the 4 states, and to take appropriate actions in recognition of the validity of this evidence. It is very different from Qatar's early attempts to dismiss this evidence. Qatari officials have claimed that no US designated terrorists walk free in Doha, that they have all been prosecuted, jailed, had their assets frozen, and are banned from travel. And perhaps soon that will be true. These steps are results of the pressure put on Qatar, and they are welcome, even if it seems that Qatar finds it easier to make these concessions to our Western friends rather than sit around the table with its own Arab Gulf neighbors to discuss their concerns and past experiences. We are ready for this process to take a very long time. We will not again agree to sweep these problems under the carpet. Much is at stake here that affects the narrative of our religion and the forces fighting for its future direction. Qatar is one of the premier state supporters of jihadi interpretation of our religion. If we succeed in changing their behavior, it will make all our future safer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Let me begin the question and answer session, if I may, by returning you to this point that you made at the beginning and then again at the end of your remarks of the absence of trust towards Qatar on the one hand, your increasing sense that pressure is beginning to work and that you're willing to apply it, as you just said a moment ago, for a long time. And then again, Qatar obviously is a country that has the resources to resist up to a certain point. And these factors seem to point towards an impasse. If it does drag on for a long time, for 2 or 3 years, what are the costs associated with this policy? How do you see it affecting the way in which the conflicts of the region, from Yemen to Syria to Libya and even to Palestine, are going to play themselves out as these dynamics begin to presumably become more aggravated and begin to infect regional diplomacy more?
I think first of all that we still count on wisdom. We still count on what I would call, people with gray hair to actually play a role in determining, Qatar's approach to this crisis. I think as the Qataris realize that this is a crisis that will drag on, we will see that they will become a little bit more realistic. We've seen, not because of the financial aspect, because as you mentioned, they don't have any lack of funds. But I would say that they will realize that, although their ports are open, their airport is open, they don't have really, let's say, an immediate neighborhood to sort of deal and approach. The crisis is real, as I mentioned. What effect will it have on other issues? I think to a certain extent it might have an early adverse effect, but this will change. Because at the same time, I think the issue will be clear. You're not going to have somebody trying to sort of undermine this or that crisis under the table. The Qataris have been, sort of cut to size in what they can do. I think they benefited a lot from the sort of sense of gray area that they moved in. And I think things are clearer right now. So our intention right now is to put this on a back burner, but at the same time to deal with other, with other issues of peace and stability in the region, Yemen, Libya, etc. And I think this is the smart thing to do. I mean, we've sent a message to Qatar. We said we're not there to escalate. We are not after regime change. We're after a change of behavior, not in your independent policy, but in your support of extremism and terrorism. You need to do that. When you do that, come back to the fold, and we can work together, basically.
So you began with the reported 13
Yes.
demands. Are those to be seen as a kind of maximalist opening gambit in an ongoing process? It's now been reduced to a core of 6. Is there still some fungibility there? What is the real thing that needs to be done?
No, I think you had a mediator at the time, the Kuwaiti mediation. You need to give your demands to the mediator. That's how diplomacy works. You sort of up the ante on your demands. You take a ceiling, and that ceiling is negotiated. You expect that the mediator will take the demands in this, let's say, in the sort of privacy that you expect the mediation to work. And you expect the other party to come to the mediator, to come and say, these are the things I can work with, and these are the things that I can't work with. And then you start mediation. But I don't think you do that in what I would say an immature manner of basically, within an hour, putting these, leaking these demands, undermining the mediation, and then at the same time saying, I reject everything, but let's talk. And I think this will change once we see, sort of prolonged stalemate, because I think that realization itself will bring also its own sense of realism.
So the impasse is between the Qatari position, as you described it, as we reject your demands, let's talk, and your position of let's talk, but you have to comply.
No, as I said, I think I was very clear that when there is a mediation, and any mediator will actually take an opening gambit, and then you expect that this will lead to certain dynamics. And I think this is where the dynamic was undermined by Qatar.
And how do you evaluate the US efforts to date to provide that kind of a mediating function? There was obviously discussion about the role that Kuwait might play in this process earlier on.
Well, again, early days, but I think that there is more and more belief. Again, I mentioned the concern of many Western countries about what's going on, and I mentioned the reasons for it, and I think these are all, reasonable concerns. But I think these are early days, and but I think what is shaping up is the belief that this needs to be a regional solution. There are various let's say cornerstones to a solution. The 2013-2014 Riyadh agreements are a cornerstone to this solution because they're already been signed by the Qatari head of state. But we do also need, I think what has happened is in Riyadh 2013-2014, we really had no monitoring. It was all a question of trust in implementing what Qatar had agreed to. And what we have seen is that these things were not implemented. So clearly the idea that total dependence on trust on this is not going to work here. So what you need is you do need I would say, a monitoring system. A monitoring system, people ask, what is it going to monitor? It'll monitor money, it'll monitor refuge, it'll monitor broadcast.
Thank you. Gentleman right in the back there, about 7 rows back. Would like to get some balance in the questions as well. If there are any women who would like to ask you questions, please get my attention.
Yes, Mohammed Abdel Majid from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Saudi press published a while ago a statement by members of the Ahmed bin Ali branch of the Al Thani family, apologizing to Saudi and the UAE for the regional policies of Sheikh Tamim. Are you able to verify the credibility of this statement? And you mentioned earlier that you're counting on people of wisdom, people with gray hair, etc. Who would you be referring to? Are they in charge of policy making in Qatar at the moment?
Yeah. Thank you. I think first of all, the press in Qatar and in other GCC countries is very polarized. So I would I look at it as a crisis press, to be honest. So I'm not really there to comment on who said what, when, and what did he mean. But what I would like to say is that this is about behavioral change. This is about behavioral change, full stop. When I refer to wiser counsel to prevail, I expect people within Qatar to talk to their Emir. I expect people within the ruling family to also talk to their Emir and say that we cannot really have a rift with our immediate 3 neighbors, and a rift that is looking that it will actually take a long time. It's not wise to do that. It's not rational to do that. That is what I expect in many ways.
Thank you. Lady here in the second row.
Hi, Kay Wiggins from Bloomberg News. UAE officials said that they might consider having trade partners choose between the alliance or Qatar. I'm just wondering, at a time when GCC countries are looking for fresh investments, will this spook potential investments?
No, of course not. Of course not. No, of course not. That is not accurate. That is not accurate. I don't think we'll ever come to any company and say, you're either here or there. I think that's not accurate. And again, since we have a chance to deny several things now, the whole story of letters going to the FIFA Commission about the World Cup is not true. And also the Washington Post story today in the morning that we actually hacked the Qataris is also not true. But this is a crisis, and rumors, 48-hour duration rumors are part and parcel of any crisis, I would say.
Good. Yes, gentleman with his hand up just in the middle there.
Good morning. Israel Bayer, Chatham House member. My question to you, for many years it's been known that Qatar has been funding unsavory groups the timing and the veracity of the action is quite interesting. Is there something that happened immediately before this action?
This is an interesting question. And the question is basically, why now? I mean, you've known this for a while, but why now? I don't have a specific that says this is the thing that like push the red button, but I have, I would say, three important elements here. In 2014, Sheikh Tamim of Qatar signed an agreement, and he basically said, I am not responsible for the policies of my father. This is a new page. Weigh me on this new page, basically. 3 years down the road, we have not seen a change. We've seen reneging on many of the promises that were made. So clearly that's the background. We've had 3-year record of a change, but no change, basically. The second thing I think that took place is I would also suggest that huge ransom deal. That huge ransom deal was unbelievable. I mean, for you to be able to come and put $1 billion or more, and you know, the Iraqis at the time told us when the Qataris had sent a plane to collect their hostages, that there was a glitch for a few days. And we inquired with the Iraqis why the glitch, and they said there's $300-400 million on that plane, cash. And we are not going to release these people and allow that cash to come out. We have to sort out the issue of that cash first. Clearly, you know, first-hand information here, not something that I read here. That ransom deal was unacceptable. It was unacceptable that $1 billion would move and would go to various extremist and terrorist organizations in Syria and Iraq, and that there will be no, I would say, political cost to it, or there would be no monitoring of it. That was completely unacceptable. And I think that sort of showed us many, many actions that we're seeing. I think recently also, because of the changing in the Libyan situation, the Qataris have come openly and supported a lot of Al-Qaeda type groups. The Benghazi Shura Brigade, the Derna Shura Brigade, and so on and so forth. These are Al-Qaeda groups. So we've seen that. And I think, of course, the spirit of the very successful Riyadh summit, the U.S. Arab Islamic summit. I mean, that is a very, very successful summit. And I think the spirit of it shows that also within the, let's say, macro international environment, where the issue of extremism and terrorism is, as it should be, number one priority. And I think these are some of the things that I offer, to understand why now exactly.
You mentioned at the outset of your remarks that there was no sense of trying to turn Qatar into a vassal state, yeah. But that obviously Qatar has undergone a transformation, as have other states in the region, from being classical sort of small power diplomatic actors to one that have resources, that are very clear about their interests, their vision for the region, and are willing to pursue this very actively. You're talking about monitoring, you're talking about the question of trust. Is what you're requesting really for some sort of a change in the DNA of Qatari strategy and diplomacy?
If the DNA is to support jihadism and terrorism, yes. But other than that, I would say, as I mentioned in my remarks, the UAE is not a huge state, but we feel that we have, within reason, an independent foreign policy. Certainly Kuwait and Oman have very independent foreign policy. They have independent positions on Iran and on Iraq and on other issues. And I think what happens is you end up, at the end of the day, with a sort of collective consensus. It doesn't necessarily mean it's exactly what you want. But I think this is the important thing. So if the DNA is your independence, I have no problem with it. But if the DNA is that part of that independence is your support for this jihadist and terrorist project, of course I have a problem with it.
Gentleman here in the second row.
Yes.
Hi, Adnan Haj Omar, editor-in-chief of Arabesque London magazine. Turkish government offered to be a mediator and helping sorting out the problem. Don't you think that the four countries ignored this invitation? Don't you think Turkey could be a good mediator? And if we say Turkey is from outside of GCC, I think also USA also from out of GCC. So
No, I think ultimately the mediation, the mediation has to be within the GCC. We are all looking at Kuwait to play a role there. So the mediation has to be within the GCC. But as I mentioned, there is an issue of trust. And I think we have to sort of build some sort of monitoring system. I think it's in everybody's interest to know where the money is going. It's in everybody's interest to know that there is no refuge offered for people who are US. Again, I mean, look at the 59 people. The 59 people that we have mentioned and now have become part of the actual, evidence that Qatar is discussing also with the US and what to do about it. 14 are US sanctioned. 5 are EU sanctioned, 9 are UN sanctioned. This is not, something that we picked randomly and said, here's the list. All right.
Thank you. Jane Kinnemont here from Chatham House.
I'm Jane Kinnemont from the Middle East Group.
Just wait for the microphone.
Thank you. You've spoken about a number of extremist organisations and individuals. I wondered if you could say a little more about the role of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
I understand the UAE generally sees it as an extremist movement, but it operates as a recognised political actor in many countries in the region. So how do you approach that? And what are your views, what are you asking of Qatar to do when it comes to Muslim Brotherhood groups that are part of governments or political systems in the region?
Again, the UAE, with regards to this issue, sometimes is walked alone. But I think there is greater and greater consensus. I don't want to say it's all over, but there is greater and greater consensus about the relationship of the Muslim Brotherhood with the overall jihadist agenda. I don't want to go into that, sort of argument, but we do really believe that the Muslim Brotherhood, for various reasons, and I think Egypt is a clear example where the Muslim Brotherhood is resorting to political violence and terrorism to undermine the state. However, with regards to Qatar, Qatar has already agreed in 2013, 2014 to basically expel the Muslim Brotherhood leadership from Qatar. Now, how you deal with governments, etc., I think that's a different issue. This is something that you need to deal with as you see some governments with a Muslim Brotherhood element. And that is left, I think, to the independent policy of the state. So I think that distinction, although sometimes difficult, but I think it's clear. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about support for various Muslim Brotherhood outlets, media outlets from Turkey to undermine Egypt and, basically pouring millions and millions of dollars of money into that. We are talking about cadres and leadership that are in Qatar that are conspiring here and there. And I think this is an issue, as I said, which is quite contentious, but I think the UAE has its view, and I agree that perhaps it's not very comprehensive, but I think in our understanding, the way to defeat extremism and terrorism is not only to address the actions of terrorists, but it is also to undermine what I would say the narrative and ideology of extremists. This is connected, and this has been the UAE view, and we'll fight for it because we believe it's right.
Thank you. You sir in the second row here. Thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ismail Farah from Al Jazeera. I know you don't like us, but I hope you answer the
well,
question.
I don't not like you, but I don't watch you. Let's say that.
But you keep talking about us,
Yeah.
People like yourself say we're not influential, but we seem to be at the top of your demands anyway. My question is, you say you don't have a specific answer to the question, why now? What pushed the red button? So this whole thing when it started by the media campaign in your country and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, the media campaign against Qatar wasn't talking about money in Iraq, wasn't talking about Syria, wasn't talking about Libya. They were talking about comments attributed to the Emir of Qatar in the Qatari official news agency. Qatar maintained these comments were not true, that these sites were hacked. Now, when you say you don't have a specific answer to why now, what pushed the red button, doesn't your answer really make the story of the Washington Post saying, according to US intelligence services, that your country manufactured this whole episode and actually orchestrated the hacking of Qatari official sites? Doesn't it really make the Washington Post story a lot more believable?
Yeah. Well, that's Al Jazeera take on it, I guess. But the Washington Post is not true, purely not true. That's what I will say, and I think you will see in the next few days that the Washington story will die. I think the issue that this has been festering since 2014, because as we have seen since 2014,
Why now?
again, I give my answer, I think, but if you have another interpretation, you're welcome to it. Yani. But I give my answer, and I think I was quite clear about it. Shukran.
Thank you. Lady right at the very back of the room in the center.
Hi, Ferdows Bahbouh, a freelance journalist and member of Chatham House. Thank you for your remark, and if you could kindly elaborate more on the Syria crisis, the Syrian war, and the challenges by making Qatar more dependent or in need for Iran, and we all know the destructive role Iran is playing in Syria. Thank you.
Good question. I think number one is, in various conversations, which I was party to, very early on, we raised the alarm that what Qatar and some others, one other, let's say, were doing in Syria was destructive to the opposition. The Syrian revolution started as basically a peaceful mobilization against a cruel regime. And it was radicalized through two things. The Qataris and the Turks worked very hard to ensure Muslim Brotherhood control over the opposition. When that didn't bring results, we saw a big role played by the Qataris in radicalizing and the opposition through groups such as al-Nusra and others. And this is all documented. And the argument that was thrown at us many, many times is that these are the best fighters on the ground, and ultimately we will not win except through them. With regards to their radicalism and their jihadism, this is something we will deal with later. The end result is that many of the, what I would call the liberal, secular, decent, rational, moderate Islamist voices in Syria have been marginalized. And at the same time, I think morally, many people in the West and other places see that the opposition is bankrupt and the regime is bankrupt, unfortunately, because of the developments that we have seen and the rise of ISIS and others. And I would say that fundamentally, our compass, and this has always been the UAE's compass, our compass is in any issue, you have to realize that you cannot, as President Trump said, feed the beast. If you do feed the beast of jihadism and of terrorism and extremism, then it'll be a beast, you can't control it. And I think Syria is a classic case of Qatar's destructive role in what has happened to the opposition. Vis-a-vis Iran, Iran, as I said, is not at the heart of this issue, but Iran will try and benefit from this issue. Currently, I'm seeing a very confused response from Iran. And this is very uncharacteristic, And mainly, I would say, is because of the serious internal debate taking place in Iran about a president who has won a big popular mandate but want to ensure his efficacy, and about a revolutionary guard who wants to pretend as if that election didn't take place. So clearly the Iranians were caught off guard by the crisis and have not been, I would say, as sharp in their response as one would expect. I would expect once they regain some of the balance, they will take a position against Saudi Arabia, who in the current polarized situation in the region, they consider as their main nemesis.
I think we're all struck by the fact that the stakes in this crisis are very high, that it may be a long haul. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come here to address, set out your case and for answering all the questions. Please join me in thanking you.
Thank you. Thank you.